Author Hal Elrod once said, "The moment you take responsibility for everything in your life is the moment you can change anything in your life." The moment you can take responsibility for everything is the moment you can change anything. Hi everyone, Chris Natzke here with Black Belt Leadership Speaking and Coaching with your Mind of a Champion tip of the week. You know, we live in a society where things are coming at us from all different angles and situations and times, etc. And oftentimes it can be easy to blame what's happening on the outside to how we're feeling on the inside as also what our performance is all about. But what I have found is that when we are able to take accountability of what's going on inside of us, to take responsibility for the things that we create, promote, and allow in our lives, life not only is more effective, but it becomes easier. We become happier beings. And it basically works in conjunction with when I'm out speaking and I talk about this idea of the champion's mindset, of finding this accountability within ourselves that know that when we find that power, we can do anything we put our mind to. And I was thinking recently about a time several years ago where I was asked to do a commencement speech at a local high school here in Denver. Now, this wasn't your typical high school. It was an all-boys school, number one. But number two, it was a correctional facility here in Jefferson County. And basically what it was is these were high school boys who had gotten in trouble with the law. And as a result of being convicted on offenses, they had to go into this correctional facility. And as part of that, as part of doing their time, they had the opportunity to get their high school diploma. And, you know, let me just set the picture to you. This wasn't a typical high school when you came up to it. Man, when I came in, after I parked, I walk up and the first thing I see at the gate is a 30-foot wall with barbed wire over the top. And couldn't bring in a cell phone, had to check in ID and everything at registration, and it was a whole different environment. And so I gave a talk that day on what I called the 3 abilities of leadership. And what was so interesting and why I want to share this with you today is after I gave that talk, I went to the reception afterwards and I noticed that all of these young men were sitting around the table enjoying refreshments with their family, laughing, joking, and you could see the pride on their parents' faces that their child had just graduated high school. And, you know, they had just graduated high school, but many of them were still going to have to stay in this institution in order to complete their time that was due. But it struck me so much that I could have been in any high school here in Colorado and parents would have been acting the same. They would have been interacting with their kids. They would have been proud of their sons in the same way. And so it made me think, wow, this message that I gave to these young men is very appropriate and applicable to all of us. Because many of these young men, when they were going to be leaving there finally, they were going to be going back out into the same neighborhoods, into the same schools, into the same situations, and that had led them to where they had gotten. So they had to not only move into an old structure, but they had to bring a new part of themselves to that experience. Otherwise, repeating those behaviors were going to be the same. So what I did is I shared with them what I consider to be the 3 abilities of leadership, and that's what I want to share with you now. And number 1 is adaptability. Adaptability. Now, when you first hear that word, you probably think, well, adaptability means I need to be able to coalesce in certain situations, and I need to basically become part of the group, and I need to adapt to other people's behavior. And I think that's true, but that's not the context that I was sharing with them. When I was talking about adaptability, it meant going into situations that you knew might be tough, but be able to come in there with who you really were. Not coalescing to the group, not just going through and conforming to what everyone else is doing, but be strong enough to adapt to those situations by being your true self. Who are you meant to be? And have the strength to be able to do that. That's how we adapt. We don't adapt by giving up ourselves. We adapt by being able to integrate ourselves into those situations. And if those situations don't work, then we have to have the courage to remove ourselves from them. So number 1 was adaptability. Number two is responsibility. Now, you might think of the word responsible, as we all do, about being accountable for our actions. And if we have certain things that we need to get done, we get them done on time, etc. And I think that's a very good definition. But my definition was a little different. It wasn't responsibility, it was a responsibility, the ability to respond. Most of these young men had come to the situations they were in where they, because they were in a situation that brought them challenge, that brought them confusion, whatever. And in the moment of truth, they decided to react in a way that wasn't beneficial to them. They reacted versus responded. They didn't step back and think, man, is this a good choice for me to make? Is this something that's really in my highest good? Is this something that's really in the highest good of all concerned? No, they were reacting to a situation. So the idea there is how can we respond to difficult situations? How can we take a step back and evaluate? And before we say something, before we take an action, we decide in our minds what's the best route to take that we know is that's going to benefit us and benefit others. So rather than just responsibility, how are you doing with responsibility? And then finally is possibility. Possibility. Many of these young men were in that situation they were in because they couldn't see a higher possibility for themselves. They grew up in certain homes in certain neighborhoods and had things role modeled for them that just showed patterns repeating of bad behavior. But now they had this experience, and now they were going to have a possibility to renew everything, because I kept telling them that they were not their past. What they were is in the present moment, they could create something that was different for themselves. When you think about probably the most profound leaders and people that have made the greatest impact in human history, they're the people that talked about possibility. Martin Luther King talked about his dream, the possibility of equality for everyone. Nelson Mandela talked about the idea of the same thing about this equality for people that helped bring down apartheid. Someone like a Mother Teresa was talking about this element of humanity, and someone who is diminutive as her, 5 feet tall, made a change throughout India in terms of how they cared for the poor. So they were able to make an impact. But the one thing that they all had in common was this, is they were very clear about what they were for, not what they were against. Let me say that again. They were able to articulate what they were for, and they weren't just focused on what they were against. There's a story about Mother Teresa where back in the Vietnam War, she was asked to lead a march against the war. The organizers were there, had tons of people there, and they said, Mother Teresa, would you please lead us in this march against the war? And she flatly declined. And the organizers couldn't believe why she would do this, because there were all these horrific things happening in the war. And then she said to them, my friends, if you have a march against the war, I will not participate. But if you have a march for peace, I will lead you. If you have a march for peace, I will lead you. So now, what are you for? Where do you see possibilities? Not only for yourself, but in the people that you lead. So there you have it, my friends. There are my 3 abilities to leadership. Number 1 is adaptability. Number 2 is responsibility. And number 3 is possibility. And my challenge for you this week is see how you can integrate those 3 concepts in the things that you do this week, in your relationships, at work, in places where you lead. And when you find you can do that, now what's going to happen is you take responsibility for all the things in your life so you have the ability to change anything. So thanks so much for joining me on this. I so appreciate your support, your comments, and your sharing. And this has been Chris Natzke with Black Belt Leadership Speaking and Coaching. And we'll see you next time on the Mind of a Champion Tip of the Week.